Hey, I'm Andy Erdman, and I wanted to talk to you about an event that happened in 1849 because I think it reveals a lot about the bitter divisions and the fractiousness we've been seeing in our country. And the event I'm going to talk about has echoes of January 6th and of the MAGA movement. And like a lot of events that have driven Americans apart, this involved competing productions of Macbeth. Not entirely, but a little bit. On the night of May 10th, 1849, there was an enormous crowd that was gathered outside of the very fancy Astor Opera House, which had been built 2 years earlier in Lower Manhattan on Astor Place. There was a huge mob that was trying to break into the opera house and stop the performance of Macbeth. And one thing led to another, and eventually federal troops came in and opened fire on the mob. It has to do with a rivalry between two actors, one named William Macready, who was a very famous British actor, and another named Ned Forrest, who was the first American-born, really famous tragic actor. And it's described as a rivalry, but really Forrest over time showed that he just was increasingly paranoid of Macready and felt Macready was trying to undermine him. And Forrest was very popular with a group known as the Bowery Boys, who were this sort of tough proletarian, male, working class group that was associated with Lower Manhattan. And they preferred to go see their plays and their entertainments at the Bowery Theater. They looked upon the Astor Opera House, not incorrectly, as being the haunt of what they called the codfish aristocracy, the elite. The Bowery Boys, who were really behind this riot, just hated Macready and wanted to shut down that production at the Astor Opera House, considered themselves Native Americans, even though, of course, they were not only not indigenous, there were many of them Irish and German immigrants, or the children of Irish and German immigrants, and they were brutally white supremacist. The week before this happened, in May of 1849, Frederick Douglass had been in town addressing the American Anti-Slavery Committee, and they broke up meetings and harassed meetings of the American Anti-Slavery Committee. So you can see how important kind of whiteness is in this growing American identity. There's also a need to be seen and validated by the British. It's like our parents, like, we're not part of you, we're better than you, but could you please say that we're as good as you? And so a lot of this revolved around rhetoric of patriotism. Macready eventually appeared for the beginning of what would be his farewell tour on Monday, May 7th, 1849. And a bunch of Ned Forrest's Bowery Boys were in the audience, and they started throwing rotten eggs and pennies and a substance called asafoetida, which was very smelly, and they shouted him off, and they said, "Be gone, get lost, you English hog, you English dog." Macready said, "Look, I'm done. I'm not going to do the rest of my tour. I'm going to go back to England." And it's at that point that a number of New York's wealthy, powerful elite, including the writer Washington Irving, and a number of other people said, "No, no, no. We won't have the mob dictating what goes on stage." And they got Mayor C.S. Woodhull to put a huge detachment of police in the Opera House for the next performance, which would be Thursday, May 10th. In the interim, Forrest and the Bowery Boys and the people who controlled them, they put placards up and they said, "American working men will not be controlled by the English." And they even let a conspiracy theory go that there was a steamship full of British, I don't know, agents ready to reconquer New York. This wasn't true at all, but they kind of published it. And so there was a lot of hysteria building up. So the performance started to go on May 10th, but when Macready came on stage, there were hisses, groans, boos, and a lot of the miscreants were taken to a room in the basement and they were locked up by the police. There were a ton of police in the theater. Meanwhile, outside, there was a mob that was arming themselves with paving stones. These are big, heavy paving stones, which were in ready supply because they were building a sewer line under Fourth Avenue. The so-called mob didn't stop. They were an angry, agitated group. They kept breaking windows, and the police were determined to keep order. The crowd got to be about 10 or 15,000 people. Eventually, the cavalry were called in, and they sort of made a show of a kind of charge with their sabers, and they were knocked off their horses, and soldiers were injured. And then General Sanford, who was in charge of the 7th Regiment of the New York National Guard, he gathered his soldiers with muskets and he had them fire above the heads of the crowd. The crowd seemed to think this must be blanks. They wouldn't actually fire on us. And then Sanford gave the order to fire directly into the crowd. 23 people were killed. Most of them had nothing to do with the riot itself. They were just onlookers. The people eventually arrested were generally on the young side, mostly in their late teens. A lot of them, it turns out, were not actually particularly poor. They were from upper working class neighborhoods and streets. They worked as butchers, they worked as boatmen. And it was found when a jury was convened that the troops were indeed responsible for the deaths, but that they were justified. And this led to a lot of further agitating over who was to blame. Why didn't the mayor just close down the theater? Why did he kowtow to these wealthy and powerful classes? On the other hand, why should a play not go on based on this misinformation? It's said that this was sort of the last time that theater audiences of different classes could gather together under one roof in New York. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but it does lead to an increasing sense of a very kind of hurt, angry group that's very male and sort of adolescent. And I think what's particularly telling, in addition to some obvious echoes of today or precursors of today, is what if you take aspects of that angry, very male, very kind of wounded feeling group and its aggressive energy, and you combine it with people who do have governmental and monetary and structural power? What if you put them together? That's what I was thinking. I think that's part of what we're seeing today, this kind of inevitable, if terrible, confluence of various power parties. Anyway, I do plan to do a longer, maybe multi-part YouTube series on this and to other little known or less known facts and incidents in American history and phenomenon, because I think it's really important for understanding what's happening today and how things might play out.